Her New Year's resolution lasted 11 days, not because she broke it, but because at 2:17 in the morning, her phone rang with 5 words, "Your son is in the ER." She ran through those hospital doors with one thought: save him. What she found was the man she'd vowed to forget, standing there in a $1,000 suit, on the hospital board, staring at her 12-year-old son's face. His face for the very first time. And in 3 seconds, 13 years of lies were about to unravel. Because that boy, he had his father's eyes. And his father didn't even know he existed. Catherine's New Year's resolution lasted exactly 11 days. Not because she broke it, but because at 2:17 on a January morning, her phone rang with the words every mother fears. "Mrs. Clayton, this is Mercy General. Your son has been admitted to the ER." And just like that, every promise she'd made to herself shattered. Let me back up. New Year's Eve, midnight, while the rest of the city counted down to champagne and confetti, Catherine Clayton stood at her kitchen sink with her palms pressed flat against the cold counter and whispered one name: Matthew Kisner. She didn't say it like a prayer. She said it like a curse she was finally ready to break. Forget him, not forgive him, not understand him. Just stop carrying his ghost into another year. Outside her kitchen window, fireworks split the sky, gold and silver sparks that lit up the darkness for 3 seconds before fading to nothing. She didn't watch them. She'd stopped believing in new beginnings a long time ago. But this year she was going to try. 13 years, 4,746 nights, to be exact. That's how long she'd done this alone. Pregnancy without a hand to hold, labor without someone to yell at, midnight fevers, and emergency room visits, and the terrible, suffocating panic of being the only person standing between your child and the world. She'd survived it, all of it. So surely she could survive erasing one man's name from the part of her heart that still ached when she said it out loud. Her phone sat silent on the counter. Michael was at a sleepover, 12 years old now, almost 13, growing faster than she could keep up with. Basketball practice and video games, and that new habit of rolling his eyes when she asked too many questions. He was becoming someone, and she'd done that, alone. The memory came without permission. 13 years earlier, different kitchen, Matthew's penthouse, champagne in crystal glasses, his hand warm on her waist, the lie of forever hanging in the air between them, like something they both wanted to believe. She shook her head. No, not tonight, not this year. At 12:01 a.m. she made her vow. This year, she would forget Matthew Kisner. What she didn't know was that in 264 hours, that promise would detonate in her hands. The call came 11 days later. 2:17 a.m. Catherine was half asleep, that thick, heavy kind of sleep where dreams and reality blur together. Her phone lit up the darkness. She grabbed it without thinking, still caught in that space between consciousness and panic. Hello? Mrs. Clayton? The voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that emergency room nurses practice until it sounds like muscle memory. This is Mercy General Hospital. Your son Michael has been admitted to the ER. The words didn't land all at once. They came in pieces. Your son, ER. Admitted. What happened? Her voice came out strange, high and thin, like it belonged to someone else. Is he okay? What happened? He collapsed during basketball practice. We're running tests now. You should come right away. The rest of the conversation disappeared into static. Catherine was already moving, feet hitting cold floor, hands grabbing keys, coat, purse. She didn't remember getting to her car, didn't remember the drive. Just the way her hands shook on the steering wheel. Just the prayer she kept, whispering even though she wasn't sure who she was praying to. Please, please, not him, not my baby. By the time she skidded into the hospital parking lot, her vision had narrowed to a single pinpoint of focus. Get to Michael, nothing else matters. Get to Michael. She burst through the emergency room doors just as a trauma team rushed past. White coats and urgent voices, and the squeak of wheels on linoleum. The fluorescent lights were too bright. Everything smelled like antiseptic and fear. And then she saw him. Matthew Kisner stood near the nurse's station, jacket half buttoned, sleeves rolled to his elbows, like he'd come straight from a boardroom. His hair was graying at the temples now. 13 years had done that. But she would have recognized him anywhere. The billionaire CEO whose face stared out from business magazines. The man she had not seen in 13 years. The man who did not know he had a son. Their eyes met. For one suspended second, the world narrowed to the space. Between them, shock bloomed across his face, raw and unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. Devastation crashed through her chest like a wave she couldn't outrun. He said her name. Catherine. It broke slightly, like her name still lived somewhere tender inside him. Like 13 years hadn't been long enough to bury it. She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because if she opened her mouth, she'd scream or sob or both. And her son was somewhere behind those swinging doors, and that was the only thing that mattered. So she did what motherhood had trained her to do. She walked forward, past Matthew, past the shock on his face, past 13 years of rage and grief and questions that had no good answers, toward the room where her child lay waiting. Because 13 years ago, he had walked past her. And turnabout, as they say, is fair play. You know what strikes me about Catherine's story? How many of us have made promises to ourselves that life had other plans for. If you've ever vowed to move on from someone, only to have the universe laugh in your face and drag them right back into your world at the worst possible moment. You're not alone here. And if this story is already feeling a little too familiar, a little too close to your own midnight resolutions and the men you tried to forget, stay with me, because what happens next will either break your heart or mend it. Maybe both. The ER room was small, sterile. Michael lay in the bed, eyes closed, chest rising and falling under a thin hospital blanket. Monitors beeped steadily, each one a promise that his heart was still beating. Catherine was at his side in 3 steps, hands smoothing his dark hair back from his forehead, the way she'd done 1,000 times before. "Hey, champ," she whispered, and her voice only shook a little. Michael's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her and tried to smile. "Hey, Mom, you scared me half to death." "Sorry." His voice was groggy, soft. Coach freaked out. "I just got dizzy. It's not a big deal." But it was. Catherine could see it in the way the nurse hovered near the door, in the IV line taped to his hand, in the monitor that wouldn't stop beeping. A doctor stepped in moments later, older, gray-haired, reading from a tablet with the kind of careful neutrality that meant bad news was coming. He explained tests, monitoring, the need for a specialist consult. Words Catherine couldn't quite hold on to because her brain kept screaming one thing over and over: make him okay. Just make him okay. And then Matthew appeared in the doorway. Catherine's spine went rigid. Michael's eyes tracked to the stranger, confused. "I'm on the hospital board," Matthew said quietly. Not to Catherine, to the room, to the air between them. "I heard a Kisner name, called in the ER. I thought—" He stopped, because he was looking at Michael now, really looking, and the resemblance hit like a freight train with no brakes. The same dark eyes, the same dimple in the left cheek, the same stubborn set to his jaw that Catherine had loved once and hated for 13 years. Michael looked between them. His 12-year-old brain was working fast, faster than either adult was ready for. "Mom," he said slowly, "why does he look like me?" The truth detonated in Catherine's chest, because lies had expiration dates, and hers had just run out. But what she didn't know yet, what neither of them knew, was that her son had been carrying a secret in his chest, literally. A ticking clock disguised as a heartbeat. And the diagnosis coming in the next few hours would force Catherine and Matthew to face 13 years of silence, betrayal, and a love that never quite died. It was just buried, waiting. And now, there was no walking away. Not this time. Matthew Kisner had been called many things: visionary, ruthless, untouchable. But father had never made the list. He stood in the hospital corridor now, back pressed against the wall outside Michael's room, and felt the world tilt sideways in a way no boardroom ambush or hostile takeover had ever managed. That boy had his face. His mind was racing, trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't know existed 2 hours ago. Why is Catherine here? Whose child? But he knew. God help him, he knew. The hospital board meeting felt like it happened in another lifetime, though it had only been earlier that evening. He'd been reviewing quarterly budgets when his assistant interrupted. Unusual for her, she knew better than to disturb board sessions. "Mr. Kisner, there's been a flagged admission in the ER. Name: Kisner, Michael, age 12. The system alerts board members when family names appear." Family name. He'd assumed distant relative. Some third cousin twice removed he'd never met. Maybe a mistake. Data entry error. It happened. But then he'd walked down to the ER, curiosity more than concern, and caught a glimpse of the intake tablet a nurse was reviewing. The boy's photo. The resemblance didn't just hit him. It detonated. Like physical violence delivered through a screen. Dark eyes. His dark eyes. The dimple in the left cheek that his own mother used to press her finger into when he was small. The stubborn set to the jaw that stared back at him every morning from the mirror. And then Catherine had walked through those doors. Catherine, who he hadn't seen in 13 years, who'd left his penthouse one night and never looked back, who he'd told himself he was over. The lie tasted bitter now. A nurse approached, young, efficient, already annoyed with him. "Family only past this point, Mr. Kisner." "I'm on the hospital board," he said, automatic. The answer that opened every door in this building. She didn't blink. "That's not what I said." The words landed like a slap. His power meant nothing here. His money meant nothing. The name that made hospital administrators rush to accommodate him was just noise in a place where the only thing that mattered was blood. And that boy in the room behind her. His blood was flowing through that boy's veins, whether Matthew had known it or not. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him. That high-pitched hum that made his skull ache. His Italian leather shoes squeaked on linoleum floors, $600 shoes that suddenly felt ridiculous. He could buy this hospital. He could fund a new wing, name it after himself, have his portrait hung in the lobby. But he couldn't buy back 13 years. And the look Catherine gave him when she walked past, cold, dismissive, final, told him she knew it. The memory came uninvited. 13 years ago. His penthouse. The bathroom door cracked open, and Catherine standing there with something in her hand. A pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. He'd seen it for maybe 3 seconds before his phone rang. Sarah's name lit up the screen. His assistant. The woman who'd been helping him close the biggest deal of his career. The woman who always called. At the worst possible times. He'd answered God help him, he'd answered. Matthew, I've got the contracts ready for review. Can you meet me at the office? And Catherine's face when she heard that voice, that woman's voice at 11:30 at night, changed. Something behind her eyes shuttered closed. He saw it happen in real time and didn't know how to stop it. Late meeting, he'd said, defensive. It's just business, Kath. At midnight. The deal closes tomorrow. You know how important this is. More important than this? She'd held up the test. Her hand was shaking, and he'd frozen. Because yes, in that moment, some terrible part of him thought, the timing is wrong. I'm not ready. This deal is worth $40 million, and I can't think about babies right now. He didn't say it, but she saw it. She saw it in his face. The door closed behind her 3 minutes later. He told himself he'd call her the next day. After the meeting, after the deal closed, after he had time to think, to breathe, to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with the information that he was going to be a father. But when he tried to call, it went to voicemail. When he tried again, nothing. He told himself she needed space, that she'd reach out when she was ready. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, Sarah told him Catherine had moved on. I saw her profile updated on social media. She's seeing someone new. It was a lie, he'd learn years later, but by then the damage was done. So he moved on too. Built his empire, made his billions. Dated women whose names he couldn't remember now. Told himself he'd dodged a bullet. That fatherhood would have derailed everything he'd worked for. But did he really believe that? Late at night, alone in penthouses that felt more like mausoleums than homes, did he really believe he was better off? The narrator, in his own head, asked questions he refused to answer. Now, standing in this hospital corridor, with cheap fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, all those unanswered questions were demanding payment with interest. But there was something Matthew didn't know. Something Catherine had protected for 13 years. Something that boy had been asking about since he was old enough to notice that other kids had dads who showed up to basketball games and birthday parties. Matthew stepped closer to the window, the one that looked into Michael's room. Through the glass, he watched Catherine smooth the boy's hair. So gentle, so practiced. 13 years of moments like this that Matthew had missed. The boy's eyes opened. Matthew's heart stopped. Even through glass, even from 10 feet away, it was like looking into a mirror that showed him who he used to be. Before the money, before the empire, before he became the kind of man who chose a $40 million deal over the woman he couldn't finish that thought. Wouldn't. A doctor entered Michael's room. Matthew couldn't hear what was being said, but he watched Catherine's face crumple, watched her hand fly to her mouth, watched her nod once, twice, like she was trying to convince herself of something impossible. Bad news, then. Something was wrong with his son. His son. The words felt foreign in his mind, like a language he'd never learned to speak. Michael turned his head toward the window. Their eyes met, and Matthew saw the question forming before the boy even opened his mouth. Saw it in the way Michael's gaze flicked between him and Catherine, calculating, piecing together a puzzle no 12-year-old should have to solve alone. Catherine said something sharp. The doctor left. She pulled the curtain across the window, shutting Matthew out. Literally and metaphorically. But it was too late. Because Matthew realized, with crushing certainty, standing in that antiseptic hallway, with his $600 shoes, squeaking, and his billion-dollar empire meaning absolutely nothing. He'd been a father for 12 years. He just didn't know it. And that boy in the ER? He'd been asking about his father for a decade. Growing up with an empty chair at every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every birthday cake with candles that got blown out while wishing for something, someone who never came. What happens next will shatter every assumption Matthew Kistner ever made about family, about success, about what it means to be untouchable. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't money or influence or empire. Sometimes it's just a 12-year-old boy with your eyes lying in a hospital bed or wondering why you never wanted him enough to stay. And Matthew was about to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. Michael Clayton opened his eyes to find his mother's face hovering above him, and he knew two things immediately. He'd scared her, and she was hiding something. He'd seen that look before, the forced smile, the tight corners around her eyes that meant she was holding something back. It was the same look she got when bills came in the mail, and she'd shuffled them into a drawer real quick when he walked into the kitchen. The same look when other kids' dads showed up to basketball games, and she'd suddenly get very interested in her phone. The same look every single time he asked about his father. His chest ached, but not like regular pain, not like when he'd broken his wrist in 4th grade or twisted his ankle running bases. This felt wrong at the root, like something inside him wasn't working the way it was supposed to. The monitors beeped steadily beside him. The sheets were thin and cold, that rough hospital kind that never get warm no matter how long you lay under them. He could see his basketball shoes on the chair in the corner, still muddy from practice. Coach had been yelling at him to run the play again when everything went sideways. The gym ceiling, someone shouting his name, then nothing. "Hey, baby," his mom said, and her voice shook just enough that he knew things were bad. "Am I dying?" he asked. Direct, because he was 12, and he'd learned that adults danced around the truth unless you pinned them down. "No, baby, no." But her hand tightened on his. "Then why do you look like that?" She blinked. "Like what?" "Like you're scared of something worse than me dying." His mom's face crumpled for just a second, half a second, before she pulled it back together. But he saw it. He always saw it. Before she could answer, someone knocked on the door. His mom went rigid. Michael felt it in the way her hand tensed around his. Something about that knock made her afraid. The door opened, and a man walked in. Tall, expensive suit, even though it was the middle of the night. Dark hair going gray at the edges. And eyes. Michael stared. Those were his eyes. He'd spent 12 years looking at his own face in the mirror, and those were his exact eyes, staring back at him from a stranger's face. "I'm on the hospital board," the man said, but he wasn't really talking to Michael. He was talking to the room, to his mom. I wanted to check on..." He stopped, because he was looking at Michael the same way Michael was looking at him. "Why does he look like me?" Michael asked, not to the man, to his mom. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. His mom opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The man, Matthew, the nurse had called him Mr. Kistner, took a step closer. "I've arranged for the best pediatric cardiologist in the state to consult on your case. We didn't ask for your help." His mom's voice could have frozen fire. "I'm on the board. It's protocol for you to interfere in patient rooms." Michael watched them face off. His mom, with her teacher voice, the one she used when she meant business. The man with his hands in his pockets, like he was trying not to reach for something. A different doctor entered, older, with kind eyes and a tablet tucked under his arm. "Dr. Reeves," his badge said. "Mrs. Clayton, I have Michael's preliminary test results. We need to discuss next steps." His mom turned away from Matthew like he'd ceased to exist. "What did you find?" Dr. Reeves glanced at Matthew, then back to Catherine. The tests show some concerning irregularities in Michael's heart rhythm. We need to run more comprehensive imaging, an echocardiogram, possibly a cardiac MRI. These tests are expensive, and I want to make sure we have insurance authorization before we... How expensive? His mom's voice was small now. Several $1,000s. Your insurance will cover some, but there will be significant out-of-pocket costs. Michael watched his mom's face, watched the calculation happening behind her eyes. Teacher salary, single mom, the bills she thought he didn't know about. I'll handle it, Matthew said quietly. We don't need... His mom started. Yes, you do. Matthew wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Michael. Whatever he needs, whatever the tests cost, I'll handle it. His mom wanted to refuse. Michael could see it in every line of her body. Pride, anger. 13 years of something he didn't understand, but could feel radiating off her in waves. But he was watching, and she couldn't let whatever was between them put him in danger. She nodded. Once. Barely. Like the word yes would choke her if she tried to say it out loud. Matthew's shoulders dropped half an inch, like he'd been expecting a fight and was relieved he didn't get one. Dr. Reeves cleared his throat. I'll get the imaging scheduled for first thing in the morning. Michael needs rest now. Family only for the night. The word family hung in the air like a question nobody wanted to answer. That question, the one every parent dreads and every child deserves an answer to. If you've ever had to explain an absence to a child, or if you were that child who asked and never got the truth, this story was written for you. Sometimes the comments section here feels like a circle of women who've lived these exact moments. The ones where you have to choose between protecting your child from disappointment and giving them the truth they're old enough to handle. If that's you, I hope you'll share your story below. You'd be surprised how many of us are carrying the same weight. The same questions our children asked that we couldn't answer, because the truth felt too heavy to hand to someone so young. Matthew left without arguing, but he paused at the door, looking back at Michael one more time. And Michael saw something in that look that made his chest ache worse than whatever was wrong with his heart. Regret. That's what it was. After the door closed, Michael turned to his mom. That's him, isn't it? My dad. His mom's eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer, didn't need to. Why didn't you tell me he was here? In this city? This whole time? It's complicated, baby. I'm 12. I'm not stupid. I know you're not. She sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle the IV line. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From being disappointed. From hoping for someone who wasn't going to show up. Michael looked at the door, where Matthew had disappeared. But he did show up. Only because... She stopped herself, shook her head. We'll talk about this later. When you're feeling better. When we know what's wrong and how to fix it. But Michael wasn't going to wait for his mother's explanation. He was about to take matters into his own hands. Because 12 years was a long time to wonder about someone. And now that person was standing in hospital corridors with his face and his eyes, and apparently enough money to pay for whatever tests the doctors wanted to run. And the test results? They would change everything. Whatever was wrong with his heart, whatever had made him collapse on the basketball court with his teammates screaming his name, was going to force the three of them into the same room. Force answers to questions his mom had been dodging for 12 years. Catherine thought she could keep the past buried. She was wrong, because secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. And Michael was done being protected from the truth. Later, after his mom thought he was asleep, she slipped out into the hallway. Michael kept his eyes closed but listened to her footsteps fade. Through his half-closed eyes, he could see the shadow of someone standing outside his door, through the window glass, tall, waiting, his father, still there. Even though visiting hours were over, even though he'd been dismissed, still standing guard, like he had any right to. And Michael didn't know if that made him angry or grateful, or some complicated mix of both that he didn't have words for yet. Alone in the hallway, Catherine leaned against the wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Her hands were shaking again. They hadn't stopped shaking since that phone call at 2:17 a.m. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her sister. "I saw Matthew Kistner on the news last month. Please tell me that's not the Matthew." Catherine closed her eyes. 13 years of secrets were unraveling in one night. 13 years of carefully constructed walls and rehearsed explanations and protected truths. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Because her son was lying in a hospital bed with a heart condition they didn't understand yet. And the man who broke her heart 13 years ago was standing 20 feet away, offering to pay for everything. And Michael, her beautiful, too smart for his own good Michael, had already figured out the one truth she'd spent 12 years trying to hide. "That man has my eyes, Mom. Why does he have my eyes?" The answer was simple and devastating. "Because he's your father, and I never told either of you." There are two versions of the night Catherine left Matthew. The one she told herself, and the one that actually happened. For 13 years, she'd carried the story like armor. He didn't want me. He chose his career. He never called back. Simple. Clean. A narrative that made sense of the pain. But the truth was messier than that. It always is. Let me take you back. 13 years. Catherine, at 24 years old, standing in Matthew's penthouse bathroom with her hands braced against the marble countertop. She'd felt nauseous for 3 days. Chalked it up to stress at first. She was finishing her teaching degree, working part-time at a bookstore, spending her nights in Matthew's world of business dinners and networking events where she never quite felt like she belonged. But on the third morning, when she couldn't keep down toast, she knew. Matthew was at another late meeting. They'd become more frequent in recent weeks. The merger, he kept saying. This deal would change everything. Make him a major player. Set them up for life. She took the test alone. 2 pink lines that appeared so quickly, it felt like the universe had been waiting to tell her. Her hands were shaking when she dialed his number. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "Can you come home? I need to talk to you." His voice came through, distracted, rushed. "I'm in the middle of something important." Background noise, voices, and then a woman's laugh. Light, familiar, intimate. "Who's that?" Catherine asked, and her voice sounded small even to herself. "Just Sarah, from the office. We're going over the merger details." Sarah, his assistant. The woman who always seemed to call at midnight. Who knew his schedule better than Catherine did. Who looked at him during meetings with eyes that held something more than professional respect. The lie landed differently when you were holding a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines staring up at you from the bathroom counter. "It's after 11, Matthew." "I know, babe. This is the final push. The contracts have to be perfect. I'll be home in a few hours, okay?" But Catherine had spent 3 days feeling sick while he spent 3 nights with Sarah going over details. And something inside her, some instinct she'd been ignoring for months, said, "Go there. See for yourself." She had a key to his office building. He'd given it to her 6 months earlier, with a kiss and a promise. "So you never have to wait outside for me." She showed up at 11:47 p.m. She'd remember that time for the rest of her life. the way the numbers glowed on the building's lobby clock. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like descending into cold water. Each floor a layer deeper, where sound got muffled and breathing got harder. His office door was closed, but not locked. She opened it. Matthew and Sarah sat at his conference table. 2 wine glasses between them, one red, one white. Sarah's hand rested on Matthew's shoulder. Papers were spread across the table, yes, but the scene felt wrong. The lighting was too dim, too warm, too intimate for business. They both looked up when she entered, in the way Matthew said her name. "Kath, what are you doing here?" Like she was the one intruding in a space that belonged to someone else. That's what broke something inside her. "Who is she, Matthew?" Catherine heard herself ask, even though she knew exactly who Sarah was. "I told you, my assistant." "Your assistant needs wine and candlelight to discuss mergers?" Sarah stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Maybe I should go." "Maybe you should have gone hours ago," Catherine snapped. Matthew stood too, defensive posture, hands up like he was calming a spooked animal. "You're being paranoid. This is work." And that's when Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out the pregnancy test, set it on the table between the wine glasses and the merger documents. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed felt like all the air had been sucked from the room. Sarah's eyes went wide. Matthew's face, God, his face. Not joy, not excitement, not even surprise. Just fear, pure, undiluted fear. "We need to think about this rationally," he said finally. "Rationally?" Catherine repeated. "I'm building something here, Kath. The timing. She repeated it, not as a question, as an epitaph for their relationship. Because in that word, timing, she heard everything she needed to know. The baby was inconvenient. She was inconvenient. His career, his merger, his future with late-night meetings and wine glasses with assistants who touched his shoulder. That was what mattered. Catherine picked up the pregnancy test, left it on his desk instead. A reminder, evidence, proof that this moment happened. Then she walked out. She expected him to follow, to chase her down the hallway, into the elevator, out to the parking lot, to fight for her, to say he was sorry, that he'd been an idiot, that of course they'd figure this out together. Her phone lit up once as she drove home. A text, "Let's talk tomorrow when we're both calm." That was it. No chase, no fight. Just tomorrow. That never came. She called him 3 times over the next week, left voicemails that got progressively more desperate. "Matthew, please, we need to talk about the baby." He never called back. On day 8, his assistant Sarah called instead. Catherine remembered every word of that conversation. Sarah's voice had been professional, almost bored. "Mr. Kisner has asked me to let you know he thinks it's best if you both move on." Those exact words. Move on. Like Catherine was a business deal gone bad, a merger that fell through, a contract not worth pursuing. So she did. She moved on, alone, with a baby growing inside her and a heart that felt like it had been put through a shredder. But what Catherine didn't know, and what Matthew had buried for 13 years, would come out soon. Because while she'd been raising their son alone, Matthew had been living with a lie. And when that lie exploded, there'd be no going back. Catherine stood in the hospital bathroom now, hands braced against the sink. The position was identical to that night 13 years ago in his penthouse. Same shaking hands, same feeling of the world tilting sideways. But now she wasn't alone in making decisions. Now there was a boy who deserved a father. A boy lying in a hospital bed, asking questions she couldn't dodge anymore. And there was a man who'd shown up who'd offered to pay for tests, who stood outside Michael's door, even after visiting hours, ended like he was afraid to leave. Like he was trying to make up for 13 years in one night. But can she trust him? That was the question that made her hands shake now. She looked at herself in the mirror, 37 years old, tired, scared, still carrying that 24-year-old's pain like it happened yesterday. Maybe it was time to tell the truth. All of it. Not the version she'd told herself. The version that actually happened. Catherine dried her hands, straightened her shoulders, walked back toward Michael's room. Through the window, she saw Matthew sitting in the chair beside their son's bed. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, watching the monitor, like it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. He didn't notice her at first, and for 3 seconds, maybe less, Catherine saw what could have been. A father, a son, a family. Not perfect, not the fairy tale she'd imagined at 24, but real, present, trying. Then Matthew looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. He stood, met her at the door. "We need to talk," he said quietly. And Catherine knew. The past isn't past. It's just been waiting. Waiting for a 2:17 a.m. phone call. For a boy with his father's eyes asking questions that deserved answers. For 13 years of silence, to finally break open and spill truth all over the floor between them. Whether they survived that truth, that was still to be determined. Dr. Reeves was the kind of cardiologist who didn't soften bad news. And the news about Michael Clayton wasn't good. They sat in a hospital conference room at what Catherine guessed was around 5 in the morning. She'd lost track of time somewhere between the phone call at 2:17 and this moment. The room was cold, sterile, too bright, fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and half dead. Catherine sat on one side of the table. Matthew sat on the other. Dr. Reeves sat at the head with a tablet, and Michael's test results projected on the wall behind him. Michael was still sleeping. Nurses were watching him. Catherine had checked 3 times before agreeing to this meeting. Dr. Reeves didn't waste time with pleasantries. Michael's heart muscle is thicker than it should be. It's making it harder for blood to flow. That's why he collapsed. The medical term flashed on the screen: hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Catherine stared at it like the letters might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. "Can you fix it?" she asked, and her voice sounded small in the too bright room. "We can manage it. Medication, monitoring, lifestyle changes. But eventually, probably within the next few years, he'll need surgery. An implantable defibrillator, possibly more." Matthew leaned forward. "What are his chances?" "With proper care? Good. But this is genetic. One of you passed this to him?" The words landed like a physical blow. Catherine and Matthew both froze. This wasn't just a diagnosis. It was proof. Scientific, undeniable proof of connection. Michael was Matthew's son, written in DNA, confirmed by the very disease that was threatening his life. "My medical history is clean," Matthew said quietly. "I've had comprehensive physicals every year. No heart issues." Which meant Dr. Reeves looked at Catherine. Not unkindly, but waiting. "My father died of a heart attack at 43, Catherine said, and the words came out barely above a whisper. The weight of that admission crashed over her. She'd passed this to her son. This thing growing in Michael's chest, making his heart work too hard, making him collapse on basketball courts. That came from her father, from a genetic legacy she'd carried without knowing it was a loaded gun. The guilt was suffocating. Matthew spoke before she could spiral further. "We'll handle it. Together." Catherine wanted to snap at him. "We? There is no we. There hasn't been a we for 13 years. But she was too tired, too terrified, and the word together hit something soft and desperate inside her that she'd thought had calcified years ago. For the first time in 13 years, she didn't push him away. Dr. Reeves went over treatment plans, medications Michael would need to start immediately, restrictions on physical activity, no more basketball, at least not competitively, regular monitoring, the eventual surgery that would put a device in her 12-year-old son's chest to keep his heart from stopping. Catherine nodded at appropriate moments, but didn't hear half of it, just kept thinking, I did this. I gave him this. My DNA is slowly killing him. When the meeting ended, she walked outside, needed air, needed space, needed to breathe without feeling like her own heart was being squeezed in a fist. The parking lot was empty at this hour. Dawn was starting to break, that gray light that comes before sunrise. Matthew followed her out, keeping his distance at first. I'm sorry, he said finally, for all of it. Sorry doesn't give me back 13 years, Catherine replied, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I know. Silence stretched between them. Cold morning air, the distant sound of ambulance sirens. Then Matthew said something that changed everything. Sarah called you, didn't she, after you left? Catherine stiffened. Your assistant? Yes. What did she say? Catherine turned to look at him. Mr. Kisner thinks it's best if you both move on. Matthew's face went white. Actually white. Like the blood drained out of it in real time. I never said that. What? I never told her to call you. I never told her to say that. Catherine laughed. It came out harsh, broken. That's convenient. 13 years later, blame your assistant. But Matthew was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through something. His hands were shaking. I'd been calling you, he said, for weeks. It kept going straight to voicemail. I left messages, asked you to call me back, to let me know you were okay, that the baby was okay. I thought you were ignoring me, that you'd decided to do this alone. He turned the phone toward her. Old text logs showing Catherine's blocked number. Call logs with her voicemails marked deleted by administrator. And then, a termination letter dated 2 years after Catherine left. Sarah's name at the top. Reason. Unauth. I found out she'd been intercepting my calls, deleting your voicemails from my phone. She'd blocked your number without me knowing. Told you I wanted nothing to do with you. Told me you'd moved on. By the time I figured it out, months had passed. Catherine stared at the proof in his hands. It was real. The dates lined up. The termination letter cited breach of trust and interference with personal communications. They were both lied to. Why? Catherine asked, and her voice broke on the word. Because she wanted me, and she thought if she got rid of you, she'd have a chance. It worked for a while. She was patient, strategic. By the time I realized what she'd done, you'd vanished, changed your number, moved. I hired a private investigator, but you'd covered your tracks well. 13 years of missed calls. 13 years of thinking someone chose to walk away, when, really, someone else made that choice for them. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many relationships have been destroyed, not by the people in them, but by the people watching from the outside, waiting for their moment. If this twist just hit you hard, if you're thinking about your own story and wondering what might have been different, wondering who interfered, who whispered poison in the right ear at the right time, you're not alone. That's why I keep telling these stories. Because we all deserve to know we're not the only ones carrying this kind of pain. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever had someone interfere in your relationship. Someone who pretended to be a friend while they dismantled your life piece by piece. I see you. Catherine wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But 13 years of anger doesn't evaporate because of old text logs and termination letters. Even if that's true, she said slowly, you still chose work. You still said the timing wasn't right. You still let me walk out that door. Matthew nodded. You're right, I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. Regret doesn't raise a child, Matthew. I know. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen 13 years ago. Honesty. Raw, painful honesty. But maybe I can start now. Not as who I was. As who I should have been all along. Catherine didn't answer. Couldn't. Because there was one person who wasn't going to let Matthew off that easily. And he was about to wake up. Because when Michael heard the truth, all of it, his reaction would surprise everyone. And the surgery that was coming? It would test every promise Matthew just made. They walked back inside together. Not touching. Not talking. Just two people carrying 13 years of wreckage between them, trying to figure out if anything could be salvaged from the ruins. Catherine walked back to Michael's room. Matthew followed a few steps behind. Through the window, Michael was awake, sitting up in bed, staring at them both with those dark eyes, Matthew's eyes, that saw everything. He mouthed one word. Dad. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Because he wasn't asking if Matthew was his father. He already knew. Had known the moment he saw Matthew's face. Had probably known for years from looking in mirrors and wondering who he looked like. He was asking if Catherine was finally going to admit it. If the lies were over. If the truth, messy and complicated and 13 years late, was finally going to be spoken out loud. Catherine looked at Matthew, then back at their son, and nodded. Michael Clayton had imagined meeting his father 1,000 different ways. This wasn't one of them. Not in a hospital room, with monitors beeping and his chest aching and his mother's eyes red from crying. Not with the weight of a heart condition hanging over them, like a shadow. Not like this. But here they were. Catherine sat on one side of his bed. Matthew stood near the door, hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. The air was thick with everything unsaid. 13 years of silence pressing down on the three of them. Michael looked between them. 12 years old. Too young for this conversation and too old to be protected from it anymore. So you're him, my dad, Michael said. Not a question, a statement. Matthew's throat worked. Yes. Why didn't you want me? The question every abandoned child asks. Direct, devastating. No softness to cushion the blow. Matthew moved then, pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down so he was eye level with Michael, man to man, father to son. I didn't know about you. Not until last night, Matthew said, and his voice was steady but quiet. Michael's eyes narrowed. Mom said you were busy? Your mom was trying to protect you. Michael turned to Catherine. From what? Catherine's hand tightened on the bed rail. From disappointment, baby. But I've been disappointed for 12 years, Michael said. And the simplicity of that truth hit harder than any accusation could have. Catherine's face crumpled. Tears she'd been holding back since 2:17 a.m. finally spilled over. I tried to tell him. I called. I left messages. But I thought he didn't want us. I thought I was protecting you from someone who'd choose work over family. But you were wrong, Michael said. Maybe. I don't know anymore. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked the question Catherine had been dreading for 12 years. Did you love him? Catherine looked at Matthew, then back at their son. The tears came harder now. So much it nearly broke me. The honesty of it filled the room. No softening, no protection. Just truth, raw and bleeding and real. Michael turned his attention to Matthew, and what he asked next caught everyone off guard. "Are you rich? Like, for real?" Matthew blinked. "Yes." "Did it make you happy?" "No." "Then why'd you do it?" Matthew leaned back in his chair, ran a hand through his graying hair. "Because I was trying to fill a space that only family could fill, and I didn't realize it until now." Michael nodded, like that made sense to him. Like he understood something about empty spaces that 12-year-olds shouldn't have to understand. Then he sat up straighter, winced a little, his chest still hurt, but pushed through it. "Okay, here's the deal. You can be my dad, but you have to promise me 3 things. Matthew leaned forward. "Anything. 1, don't lie to me, ever. Not even to make me feel better." "I promise." 2, don't disappear. Even if you and Mom don't work out, I'm still your kid." Matthew's voice broke when he answered. "I promise." 3, teach me something you're good at. Something that's just ours. "Deal." They shook hands, formal, serious. A contract between 2 people who'd just met, but shared the same DNA, the same eyes, the same stubborn set to their jaws. Matthew cleared his throat. "What do you want to learn?" Michael didn't hesitate. "How to not be scared." The answer landed heavy. Because Michael was scared. Of the heart condition. Of the surgery coming. Of this man who looked like him, but was still a stranger. Of everything changing when he'd spent 12 years wanting exactly that. Matthew didn't offer false comfort. Didn't promise it would be easy. Just said, honest and raw, "I'm still learning that one myself." Michael smiled. Small, but real. "Then we'll figure it out together." This is the moment. The crack in the wall becomes a door. Catherine watched them. Watched Matthew's hand rest on Michael's shoulder. Watched Michael lean into it slightly, testing, seeing if this was real or if it would vanish like smoke. She saw the resemblance not just in features, but in expressions. The way they both tilted their heads when thinking. The way their eyes crinkled at the corners when they smiled. 13 years of DNA expressing itself in gestures and mannerisms that couldn't be taught, only inherited. Michael smiled, really smiled, for the first time since the collapse. Something in Catherine's chest loosened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. The faint, terrifying possibility that maybe they could figure this out. That maybe Matthew meant what he said. That maybe her son could have what he'd been asking for, since he was old enough to notice the empty chair at school events. A nurse came in to check Michael's vitals, gave him medication, reminded him to rest. The moment broke, but gently, like waking from a good dream, rather than a nightmare. When the nurse left, Michael was already yawning, the medication making him drowsy. The emotional weight of the morning catching up with him. "You should sleep," Catherine said, smoothing his hair back the way she'd done 1,000 times before. "Will you both be here when I wake up?" Michael asked, looking at Matthew specifically. "I'm not going anywhere," Matthew said, and it sounded like a vow. Michael's eyes drifted closed. Within minutes, he was asleep, breathing steady, and even with the monitors keeping their quiet vigil. But Michael's recovery was just the beginning. The real test was coming. Catherine and Matthew stood in the hallway outside his room. Dawn had fully broken now. The hospital was waking up. Shift changes, breakfast trays, doctors making rounds. "Thank you," Matthew said quietly, "for letting me in there, for telling him the truth." Catherine crossed her arms, still guarded, still afraid. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for him. He deserved to know." "I know." Silence. Then Catherine said something that surprised even herself. "There's a couch in the waiting room, if you want to stay." It wasn't an invitation to reconcile, just an acknowledgement that they were in this together now. For Michael, for however long it took to make sure he was okay. Matthew nodded. I'll take the chair in his room, if that's all right. You'll wreck your back. I don't care. And Catherine believed him. That was the terrifying part. She actually believed him. That night, or rather, that day, because time had become fluid and meaningless, Matthew slept in the hospital chair beside Michael's bed. Catherine took the couch in the waiting room down the hall. Neither went home, because for the first time in 13 years, they weren't alone in keeping vigil. Michael, drifting in and out of medicated sleep, heard voices. His mother's soft breathing from the hallway. His father's presence in the chair beside him. 2 heartbeats instead of 1. And he thought, in that half-conscious space between dreams and waking, maybe this is what family sounds like. Not perfect, not the way he'd imagined when he was younger and still believed in fairy tales, but real, present, trying. And Catherine, lying on an uncomfortable couch with her coat as a blanket, made a decision that would change all 3 of their lives. She was going to let Matthew prove himself, not because she trusted him, not because she'd forgiven him, but because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone prove you wrong. Let them show you they've changed. Let them earn what they should have had all along. Let them try, even when every instinct screams, to protect yourself and your child from more disappointment. It was terrifying. But watching Michael's face when Matthew promised not to disappear, watching her son finally get an answer to the question he'd been asking his whole life, Catherine realized something. Some risks are worth taking, even when you've been burned before, even when you're scared, especially then. Recovery, they learned, wasn't just physical. It was learning to trust again when trust had been a luxury neither could afford. Michael came home 3 days after his collapse. Catherine had cleaned the apartment twice, nervous energy that had nowhere else to go. Matthew helped carry Michael's things from the car, the basketball shoes he wouldn't be using competitively anymore, the hospital paperwork with discharge instructions, the prescription bottles that would become part of their daily routine. Matthew tried to leave after getting Michael settled on the couch, tried to give them space. But Michael called out before he reached the door. "Can you stay for dinner?" Catherine hesitated, old instincts screaming to protect the space she'd built for herself and her son. But Michael was looking at her with those pleading eyes, and Matthew was standing there like he was afraid to breathe wrong. She nodded. Dinner was awkward. 3 strangers learning how to be a family. Catherine made spaghetti. Matthew offered to help with the garlic bread, and somehow burned it so badly, the smoke alarm went off. Michael laughed. First real laugh since the collapse. Deep and genuine and beautiful. Catherine smiled despite herself. Despite 13 years of walls. Despite everything. 1 week later, Michael had his follow-up appointment. Catherine walked into the waiting room and found Matthew already there. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I promised Michael I wouldn't disappear." Dr. Reeves reviewed the test results, recommended surgery within 6 months. The heart condition was manageable now, but wouldn't stay that way. Better to be proactive than wait for another collapse. Matthew reached for Catherine's hand during the explanation. She almost pulled away, almost. But his palm was warm and steady, and she was so tired of being strong alone. She let him. 2 weeks later, parent-teacher conference. Michael's teacher, Mrs. Palmer, who'd known him since 3rd grade, smiled when Catherine walked in, then looked surprised when Matthew followed. "Michael seems happier," Mrs. Palmer said. "More focused. Whatever you're doing at home, Keep doing it. Catherine felt something tighten in her chest. He's had some big changes. In the parking lot afterward, Matthew asked quietly, "Can I come to the next one?" Catherine said yes. 3 weeks after discharge, Michael's first basketball game back. Doctor approved for limited minutes. No competitive play, but he could practice with his team, participate in low-stress situations. Matthew and Catherine sat together in the bleachers. Other parents noticed, whispered. Catherine heard fragments. "Isn't that Matthew Kisner? I thought she was a single mom. That's Michael's father?" Let them talk. Michael got put in for the last 5 minutes, scored on a simple layup. Nothing fancy. But he looked directly at them in the stands, both of them, and grinned. They both cheered. Catherine didn't even realize she was crying until Matthew handed her a tissue. Afterward, Michael hugged Matthew. First real hug. Not awkward, not tentative. Real. Matthew didn't let go for a long time. Then everything changed. Middle of the night. Catherine woke to a sound from Michael's room. Not quite a scream, more like a gasp. She ran, found him sitting up in bed, hand pressed to his chest, face gray. "Mom, it hurts. It hurts worse than before." Catherine's hands shook so badly she could barely dial 911. Then, without thinking, she called Matthew. He arrived before the ambulance. But this time, he wasn't a stranger showing up unexpectedly. He was the father who carried Michael to the car. When Catherine's hands shook too hard to hold him, he was the man who held her when she broke down in the ER waiting room. He was the person she called, and that meant everything. Back at Mercy General, different room, same monitors, same fear amplified tenfold. Doctors rushing, monitors beeping, Catherine pacing, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. Matthew still, terrified, hands clenched into fists. The longest 3 hours of their lives. Dr. Reeves emerged with that expression doctors get when the news is bad, but not catastrophic. Michael's stable, but the surgery can't wait. His heart is working too hard. We need to operate within 2 weeks. High risk, but necessary. Catherine signed the consent forms with shaking hands. Matthew signed below her, listed as father. First time his name appeared on a medical document for his son. It felt like both victory and terror. Outside in the parking lot, 4 a.m., Catherine finally broke. "I can't lose him. I can't." Matthew held her. "You won't. We won't." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll be there. Every second, every step." Catherine looked up at him. 13 years of anger and hurt and betrayal swirling in her chest alongside something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Why? Why now? Why not 13 years ago? Because 13 years ago, I was a coward, and I missed everything. His first word, his first step, his first day of school. I missed 12 years of his life because I was too afraid to fight for you. I won't make that mistake again. 12 years of firsts that can never be reclaimed. But you know what strikes me? Catherine didn't say, "You should have been there." She said, "Why now?" Because sometimes the hardest part isn't forgiving what someone did. It's trusting what they're doing now. If you've ever given someone a second chance and found yourself waiting for them to prove it was worth it, well, that's what we're watching here. And it's terrifying. If this story is reminding you of your own second chance, given or received, I'd love to hear about it. The stories you share in the comments become lifelines for others who need to know they're not alone. So please, share. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it now. "What if you do?" Catherine whispered. "What if you disappear again? Then you never forgive me. And I spend the rest of my life knowing I failed the two people who matter most. They were standing close. Too close. His hand came up to cup her face. Her breath hitched. For 1 second, one impossible second, 13 years disappeared. Then Catherine stepped back. Not yet. I need to know you'll stay. Not just for now, for always. I will. Prove it. The surgery was scheduled for 7 days later. 7 days that would test every promise Matthew made. 5 days before the operation, they were at Catherine's apartment. Michael was napping. Catherine was pretending to grade papers. Matthew was researching. Pediatric cardiac surgeons on his laptop. His phone rang. Matthew glanced at the screen. His face went white. Actually white. "Who is it?" Catherine asked. "Sarah, my old assistant." Catherine's blood went cold. "Why is she calling you?" "I don't know. I haven't spoken to her in years." But he answered. Put it on speaker so Catherine could hear. "Matthew." Sarah's voice came through, older, tired. "I need to talk to you. About Catherine. About 13 years ago." "What about it?" "There's something I never told you. Something you need to know before—" Her voice broke. "Before Michael's surgery. In case something happens. I can't carry this anymore." Matthew sank into a chair. "What are you talking about?" When Sarah finished talking, when the call ended, Catherine stared at Matthew. What did she want? Matthew looked at her, devastated. "She said there's something I need to know about the night you left. Something she never told me." Some truths arrive too late to change the past, but just in time to destroy the future. 2 days before Michael's surgery, Catherine and Matthew sat across from Sarah in a corner coffee shop. Catherine had insisted on coming. "Whatever she has to say, I deserve to hear it." Sarah looked older. Guilt will do that. Age you in ways time alone never could. Her hands shook around her coffee cup. "I need to tell you what I did before Michael's surgery, in case something happens. I can't carry this anymore." "What are you talking about?" Matthew's voice was tight, controlled. Sarah took a breath. "I was in love with you 13 years ago. I thought if I could just get Catherine out of the picture, you'd see me, really see me." "We know you deleted the voicemails," Catherine said coldly. "It was more than that." Sarah's voice cracked. Catherine's final voicemail, the one I deleted, said, "I'm keeping the baby, with or without you. But he deserves to know his father. Please, Matthew, call me back." Matthew's face went gray. "What?" "She gave you one last chance. I stole it." Catherine felt something crack open in her chest. She'd left that voicemail at 2 a.m., crying so hard she could barely speak, begging him one more time to just call back, just acknowledge their child. She'd poured everything into those words, and he'd never heard them. "But there's more," Sarah continued, and she looked directly at Catherine now. "Something Matthew doesn't even know about. I sent you an email from his account. I had his password. I managed all his correspondence." Catherine's hands went cold. "What email?" Subject line, "Moving on." I wrote, "Catherine, I've thought about it. I don't want to be a father. I'm not ready. I think it's best if we both move forward separately. I'll have my lawyer send child support arrangements, but I don't want to be involved beyond that. Please don't contact me again. Matthew." The world tilted. Catherine remembered that email, word for word. She'd received it the day after her last voicemail. Read it 17 times, trying to find some hidden meaning, some crack in the cruelty. It had broken something fundamental inside her, made her believe Matthew was a monster. But he never wrote it. "You!" Catherine couldn't form words. 13 years of rage suddenly had a target. Not Matthew, Sarah. "I'm sorry." Sarah was crying now. "I was young and stupid and a selfish. I ruined 3 lives because I wanted something that was never mine. Catherine wanted to hate her, wanted to scream, to throw her coffee in Sarah's face, to make her hurt the way Catherine had hurt for 13 years. But she was too tired, and Michael's surgery was in 2 days. She didn't have energy for anything but keeping her son alive. "Get out," Catherine said quietly. "Just get out." Sarah left. Didn't argue. Didn't ask for forgiveness she didn't deserve. In the parking lot, Catherine and Matthew sat in his car in silence. "You really didn't know," Catherine said finally. "I swear to God, Catherine, I would have been there for all of it. We lost 13 years because of her. I know. I hated you. I know. I don't anymore." Matthew turned to look at her. "What? I don't hate you. I hate what happened. But you've shown up every single day. You kept your promises to Michael. You've been the father I never thought you'd be. And I need you to keep being that, especially in 2 days. I will, I swear." Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then maybe after the surgery, we try. Not to go back, but to start new. I'd like that." They kissed then. Not passionate, not desperate. Soft, gentle, terrified. A promise, not a passion. A beginning, not a reclamation. They weren't who they were 13 years ago. They were better. They were scarred. They were real. Surgery day arrived like an unwanted dawn. Pre-op at 6 a.m. Michael sat in the hospital bed, surprisingly calm. Catherine was barely holding it together. Matthew stood beside them, silent, gripping Michael's hand. "Dad?" Michael said, and Matthew still wasn't used to that word. "Yeah, buddy. If I don't make it, don't. If I don't, promise me you'll take care of Mom. She's been alone for too long." Matthew's voice broke. "You're going to be fine. Promise me anyway." "I promise." Michael turned to Catherine. "Mom?" "Yeah, baby. I'm glad you called him. I always wanted a dad. I'm glad it's him." Catherine's tears streamed down her face. "Me too." They wheeled him away at 7 a.m., 6 hours estimated. Catherine and Matthew sat in the waiting room, clock ticking, other families coming and going. They didn't talk much, just sat close, hands intertwined, breathing together. Hour 3, Matthew got coffee. Catherine couldn't drink hers. It went cold. Hour 5, a nurse emerged. "Everything's going well. Dr. Reeves is almost done." Hour 6, nothing, silence, the longest hour of their lives. Then Dr. Reeves emerged, still in scrubs. Mask pulled down. Catherine and Matthew stood, time suspended. Dr. Reeves smiled. "He did great. The procedure was successful. He's in recovery now." Catherine's legs gave out. Matthew caught her. They sank to the floor together, holding each other, sobbing. Relief like oxygen after drowning. Recovery room. Michael blinked awake, groggy from anesthesia. "Did I die?" "No, baby. You're perfect." "Are you guys holding hands?" "Yeah." "Cool." He drifted back to sleep. Sometimes healing doesn't look like big dramatic moments. Sometimes it's just 2 people holding hands in a recovery room while a 12-year-old smiles. If this story has moved you, if you've felt every fear, every hope, every second chance alongside Catherine and Matthew, do me a favor. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's wondering if second chances are real. Someone who's waiting for proof that people can change. Because they can. This story proves it. And I want as many people as possible to feel what you're feeling right now. Recovery would take weeks. But healing? That was already happening. 3 days later, Michael was discharged. Hospital policy required a wheelchair to the car. Matthew carried the flowers, balloons, and get well cards. Dozens from school, neighbors, his basketball team. Catherine walked beside the wheelchair, hand on Michael's shoulder. As they stepped into the sunlight, Michael looked up at both of them. "Can we go home? All of us?" Matthew and Catherine exchanged a look. 13 years of hurt. 1 month of healing. A lifetime of possibility ahead. She nodded. "Yeah, baby. All of us." Catherine Clayton had spent 13 New Year's Eves making resolutions. This year, she didn't need to. 11 months had passed since Michael's surgery. 11 months of slow, intentional healing. Not just physical, though Michael's scars had faded to thin silver lines on his chest, but the deeper kind. The kind that happens when broken people decide to try again. Catherine's small home was decorated for New Year's Eve. Not fancy. Just streamers Michael had insisted on hanging, even though he claimed he was too old for kid stuff. He was 13 now, taller, healthier, laughing as he stood on a chair, trying to tape decorations to the ceiling. Matthew was in the kitchen, still bad at cooking, but trying. The smell of something burning drifted into the living room. Again. "Dad, are you destroying dinner?" Michael called out. "It's under control," Matthew called back. It was not under control. Catherine smiled. Watched them both. Her son, his father, well, they were figuring that part out. The year in review looked like this. Michael's recovery was complete. Doctor's appointments every month, then every 3 months, now every 6. The defibrillator in his chest had become part of life, not a constant reminder of what almost happened. Matthew's presence had been constant, not overwhelming, not buying his way into their lives, just showing up. School events, doctor's appointments, Sunday dinners that became a tradition. The custody arrangement was informal, flexible, loving, not court-ordered, not rigid, just 3 people figuring out how to be a family 13 years late. Catherine and Matthew were dating, slowly, intentionally, not married, not living together, but together in the ways that mattered. "Last year, I almost died," Michael said, hanging the final streamer. "This year, I got a dad and my mom back. Weird how that works." Matthew emerged from the kitchen, oven mitts still on. "You had your mom the whole time." "Not like this. She's happy now. You can tell." "You think?" "Dude, she smiles at her phone when you text. It's gross." Michael grinned. Matthew laughed. That deep, genuine laugh Catherine had fallen in love with 14 years ago and was learning to trust again now. "Okay," Michael announced. "I have an idea. Let's all write resolutions. But not the forget someone kind. The remember someone kind." Catherine's breath caught. Because a year ago, she'd stood at that kitchen sink and whispered a vow to forget. And look where it had led. They each wrote on folded paper, then gathered in the living room. Michael read his first. "My resolution is to stop being afraid of my heart. Because, yeah, it's broken, but it's also fixed. And I want to use it. For basketball, for friends, for family, for everything." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Her brave, beautiful boy. Catherine read hers next. "My resolution is to stop punishing myself for the choices I made 13 years ago. I did my best. We all did. And maybe that's enough." Matthew's voice was thick when he read his. "My resolution is to prove every single day that second chances aren't just about forgiveness. They're about showing up, again and again, for as long as it takes, for as long as I'm needed, which, if I'm lucky, is forever." 11:59 p.m. approached. They stood together in the living room. Fireworks already crackling outside. TV countdown playing in the background. But they weren't watching. Michael spoke first. "You know what's crazy? A year ago, I didn't even know my dad. Now I can't imagine life without him." Matthew's voice broke slightly. "A year ago, I was building companies, and attending galas, and none of it meant anything. Now I know what I was missing. This. You. Both of you. Catherine looked at both of them. Her past, her present, her future. A year ago, I made a resolution to forget someone. Tonight, I'm making a resolution to remember. To remember that people can change, that families can heal, that second chances aren't myths. They're miracles, and we're living proof. Midnight struck. Fireworks exploded outside, gold and silver sparks lighting up the darkness. Michael hugged them both, pulling them into a tight circle. Happy New Year, Mom. Happy New Year, Dad. The word Dad still hit Matthew like a gift. He'd never take it for granted, never stop earning it. Matthew and Catherine kissed. Different from the hospital kiss 11 months ago. This one tasted like promise, not desperation. Like future, not past. Like chosen, not chance. Later that night, after Michael had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie marathon, Catherine and Matthew sat together in the quiet. I know we're taking things slow, Matthew said, but I need to ask you something. Okay. Move in with me. Not the penthouse. I sold it. But I bought a house with a yard and a basketball hoop and a room for Michael and a room for you, if you want it. Catherine's breath caught. Matthew, you don't have to answer now, but I want you to know I'm not going anywhere, whether you move in tomorrow or 3 years from now or never. I'm here. I'm his dad, and I want to be your whatever you'll let me be. Catherine smiled. Boyfriend sounds so ridiculous at our age. Partner? Better. So, is that a yes? It's a let me think about it, but it's not a no. I'll take it. At 2 a.m., while Matthew carried a sleeping Michael to his bedroom and Catherine locked the front door, she found herself standing at her kitchen sink. The same spot where she'd made her resolution 1 year ago. But everything was different now. She wasn't whispering a vow to forget. She was whispering a prayer of gratitude to remember. Thank you, she said to no one and everything. Thank you for the phone call that shattered my resolution. Thank you for the hospital doors that led me back to him. Thank you for Michael's heart, broken and fixed and still beating. Thank you for second chances, for new years, for family. Matthew appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They stood there together, watching the last of the fireworks fade into darkness. What are you thinking about? He asked quietly. That a year ago, I thought forgetting was the answer. Turns out, remembering was. He kissed her temple. I'm going to spend every day proving you didn't make a mistake letting me back in. I know you will. And she did know, because he'd already been proving it. Every single day for 11 months, every doctor's appointment, every Sunday dinner, every burned batch of garlic bread, and every clumsy attempt at being the father he should have been all along. Second chances weren't about erasing the past. They were about building something new from the wreckage. Something scarred and imperfect and real. And as fireworks faded into silence and the new year settled around her like a blanket, Catherine Clayton smiled. Because forgetting was never the answer. Living was. Living through the pain. Living through the fear. Living through 13 years of raising a child alone, and one terrifying night in an ER and a surgery that could have taken everything. Living through it all and coming out the other side with a family that didn't look like the fairy tale she'd imagined at 24, but felt more real than anything she'd ever known. Matthew squeezed her hand. Michael called out from his bedroom, asking for water. Catherine laughed, a sound that came easier now than it had in years. This was it. This was the answer she'd been searching for. Not in forgetting, in living, in choosing love even when it scared her, in second chances and new years and boys with their father's eyes who asked the hard questions and deserved honest answers, in standing at kitchen sinks at 2 a.m. and feeling grateful instead of alone, in families that took 13 years to build but were worth every single day of waiting.